In another universe, real life didn't totally dick me over during an important period of time in which I wanted to make videos, and you would have seen a lot more from me about builds over the past month. In fact, you would have seen at least 3 separate videos, maybe 4, talking about the balance patch that came with One Path Ends. And right here on the doorstep to Path of Fire, I wanted to finally take the opportunity to talk a little bit about that stuff and show you guys why I've been having so much fun in Guild Wars 2 at the moment. Now, tomorrow when Path of Fire comes out, we're going to have a big balance patch, we're going to have a ton of new elite specializations, and what I'm talking about in this video might not become too relevant anymore. And to that you might think, well, why make the video at all, WP? But it's exactly because Path of Fire is about to come out that threatens the stability of these incredible builds that I want to share with you all 3 really fun things I've been playing. And they're builds that have been born because of the most recent patch. Not all of it's going to be new. Those of you who play a ton of the game and watch meta battle all the time might be familiar with the concept. But to those of you who don't follow things that closely, I thought you might like to hear about some of the fun new ways that we've been able to play Guild Wars 2 that, you know, when a new elite specialization comes in, may go away a bit. So there were going to be 3 different videos. We're going to cram them all into one and do sort of more of a lighter look on a series I've wanted to start for a while, which is essentially just what I've been playing. Let's check out some fun builds. And starting off with this guy, my Norn, the Shiverpeak Anaruk, a Revenant. So this is a fun build for me that really was born as of the most recent patch because the devs buffed Torment. They buffed both Torment and Confusion. So what I want to talk to you guys about here is a condition damage Revenant. So for those that don't know, Condi builds that rely on Torment and Confusion in PvE mostly have struggled in the past because they require your target to be moving to really get max damage, or they require your target to be using a lot of skills to put out a lot of damage. And both Torment and Confusion, if the foe wasn't doing much of that stuff, were kind of just weaker than Bleeds, which would just tick away continuously in the background. So the devs have continuously been changing things to try and assess this. You guys might recall that Confusion specifically never used to do any passive damage at all. It was only damage on skill activation. And well, with the big balance patch, they normalized that a bit more. And now, baseline, Torment and Confusion do the same as Bleeds. And if the target starts moving or using skills, they then do extra damage or they start ticking more frequently. And so that is really a big change. It means that any build that uses a lot of Torment or uses a lot of Bleeding is now significantly stronger, especially when we talk about late game PvE where there's raiding bosses that can be very stationary if they're tanked correctly or don't tend to use too many skills. And so the condition Revenant then kind of got massively buffed, even though the patch itself focused more on like Retribution and stuff. Retribution had a really interesting change with all these full damage things, where essentially Revs kind of get a new feeling skill now. If you take Planar Protection and you get this Dome of the Mists, which is quite fun. It's a shame it doesn't work in the new Fractal, but hey, that's another story. Most of the Rev changes didn't really affect Condi stuff or Malik stuff. There were some, but not too much. But because of the Torment baseline change, it made looking at this a whole lot more valuable. So I was desperate to get a Condi Rev going, and now the reason that I've been enjoying this build so much is because for the first time in my life I've been playing a little bit of Fashion Wars 2. Yeah, and I've really been trying here. So this character is a Norn called Shiverpeak Anaruk, right? Now the reason he has that name is because when I first got Rev, what I really wanted to do was to run around with a scythe staff and pretend I was a dervish. The main way that I wanted to do this was with the Arcane outfit, which at this point is incredibly old, actually, if I look back on it. But I wanted to run around looking a bit like this, except not pure white, and I'd be a dervish in Guild Wars 2, and it'd be very fun. So Anaruk is the Marganite description of dervishes from Guild Wars 1. The Marganites being followers of Abaddon. So, and also he's a Norn, so I called him the Shiverpeak Anaruk. So it was like I'm a minion of Abaddon that is a dervish from the Shiverpeaks. And I always loved that name, but never really got to truly play with it. Why? Because that whole Abaddon thing It's really supposed to be a call to the condition damage playstyle, which is, boon corruption, inflicting torment, inflicting confusion, and thematically it's based on Malix of the Ebony Citadel, one of the great Marganites that we fight in GW1. But I never really got to play a good Condi build, so finally with this patch, I really wanted to look into that, and amazingly as well, it was right about now that the devs added some flashy new weapons to the game, the Abaddon weapons, and I kind of just went crazy with it. So now I have a proper gear setup here, which revolves purely around this theming of Abaddon and of the Marganites. The name fits, and it's all about that condition damage playstyle. So the way that this works, for what it's worth, is you're generally going to be running Mace main hand, Axe offhand, which is kind of the Condi kit. You're going to be, generally speaking, spamming Searing Fissure, which is the 2. You're going to be using the 3, which is incredibly strong. Echoing Eruption is 5 Torment on each slam down now. And Temporal Rift with auto attacks in between. Condi Rev has had some big buffs lately, so if we look at their specific line, Corruption, they've had some fun patches. Abyssal Chill is a fairly new trait you guys might remember me talking about on a video recently. When you chill a foe, you also inflict Torment. So this is like the Reaper Grandmaster, but it's based on Torment instead of Bleed, and it's a little bit less strong. But this is incredibly powerful. One of my favorite things to do on this build is to spam this skill here, the skill 9, Unyielding Anguish, which drops this incredible AoE. Each time this AoE pulses, it drops Torment on the target and then Chilled, and then the trait gives us more Torment. And then it will pulse multiple times. And then if you've been in a battle for a while and gained a lot of energy, and in certain encounters now, very phase-heavy encounters like the Arc fight in the most recent Fractal, you can stack 100 energy and then spam a ton of Unyielding Anguishes and do a ton of Torment very, very quickly. It's great, bursty, extremely fun playstyle. Generally for the open world, I don't really like this build too much, I must admit. And that's only because power builds tend to excel in the open world where they can burst stuff down a lot faster. But it does have going for it a lot of sustain, okay? So the other legend we run, funnily enough, is Jarlis. Jarlis is so that we can use Vengeful Hammers, and each hammer proc can trigger on crit chances for us to get more Torment. As you can see, critical hits have a chance to cause Torment, and in raiding scenarios and stuff, you'll be very high crit chance, so you can unload a lot of that. Don't forget, of course, we take Invocation, and we grab Rolling Mist so that our Fury is exceptionally strong. But it's incredibly sustaining that before that, because we get the hammers, but also, Jarlis obviously has the option for the elite. It's got a very powerful self-heal. And then also we're taking Devastation. Devastation, most raids and most builds you'll find online, they all tell you to take this, Swift Termination, which is do 20% more flat damage when the target is below half of their health. Flat damage we don't care about too much on Condi builds, but when there's tons of might and vulnerability and banners and all that stuff, generally these can start to scale quite well. But in the open world, this is so strong. And in fact, in a lot of situations, on a DPS Golem, there's a very little difference between these two. Assassin's Annihilation, siphon life from foes when hitting a foe or behind the side. This is so good for open world. What it means is if I'm standing behind my target when I use these hammers, I'm life siphoning constantly. The hammers are constantly proccing these extra life steals, which gives me more sustain, and it kind of flattens out the damage as well. If you think about it on a Condi build, the first 50% of attacking an enemy is loading them with Condis, which start hitting harder and harder and ramping and getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So the second 50% of an enemy's health on a Condi build tends to evaporate very quickly, which means that in the open world, a trait like Swift Termination is actually really crap and doesn't do much for you because they're going to die because they're loaded with Condis anyway. So this sort of flattens out the damage. I love running Assassin's Annihilation on this. Assassin's Presence is also good in a group, but when you're running around in the open world, Nefarious Momentum's really awesome. And generally, I've had a huge amount of fun on Rev lately, purely for this Condi. This has been really fun looking at Path of Fire as well, because we know that the Renegade is coming, and theoretically what we'll do is we'll drop perhaps Invocation or more likely Devastation, because Invocation's got a lot of Fury stuff and the Renegade's got combos with that. And we can swap Jarlis and instead put on Carla or something perhaps, and we'll see how that goes. Of course, we get a new weapon. So one of my favorite things, and why I wanted to do a dedicated video on this build that I really enjoy, is this is one of the most interesting setups for weapons I've ever seen in the game, in terms of how you can run it. Revenant itself is kind of a weird class in that for most of the time you only have one weapon set that really suits your playstyle, even though you have access to weapon swap. So when you're on a Condi build, this is incredibly evident. If you're not running Mace Axe, what are you running? Well, until Renegade's in the game, not very much. And so all of this is going to change after this video is out. But for 2 years now, one viable thing that has been possible, and many revs have done, I've never talked about on the channel, I find it super interesting, is running the same weapons on both sets, but deliberately having it so that you can weapon swap. So this is fairly common for Guild Wars 2. I'll show you guys what I mean. What we can do is we can have our mace and axe equipped like so. And what this means is we can't weapon swap. But if we instead equip our axe into the offhand of the second set, we still get mace axe. The game reads that properly, but now we can weapon swap. Weapon swapping doesn't do anything except proc weapon swap traits or potentially sigils. So you'll notice on my mace main hand I have smoldering, which is burning duration, and I have axe with a geomancy sigil. So literally I have this, you can have this set up, and this is a fairly common thing to do in Guild Wars 2, where it's so hard to find enemies. I've wanted to demonstrate skills on enemies for so long and there's just nothing around. Here we go, finally. So what I can do is I can engage on this ooze to put myself in combat, and I can weapon swap for no other reason other than to trigger my sigil and put some bleeding out. And that's it. That's the only reason I did it. And then in 9 seconds when it cools down, I can do it again. So what I'm currently describing is a fairly common practice for Guild Wars 2, and certain builds that have been in this situation have done that a great many times. Okay, so as we can see there, we've done that. But where it gets really interesting on Rev, because of Abyssal Chill, is this, okay? What you can actually do, the best way to do the most damage, and now we're being attacked when we don't want to be attacked. This is brilliant. What you can actually do, and you can go one further than this, okay? You can instead equip your mace axe and have a proper mace axe here with geomancy, and then double up again, get a different mace and get a different axe. And so you'll see here I've got Abaddon mace axe on one set and I have Tormented on the other. Oh, the Fashion Wars 2 fits so well, okay? You can do that, and you'll notice on this set I have Hydromancy. So with the way the sigils work, only one of these should really work ever, and this would be a waste. But we're on Revenant. And so what's really fun about this is if I walk over to an ooze, I can, at the same time, I can legend swap first to trigger my geomancy. Then I can weapon swap in the same instant to trigger hydromancy. And then I can wait for my cooldowns to come back, because you do these together, okay? And when my cooldowns are back, I can legend swap again and weapon swap again. And I get Hydromancy and Geomancy. And then I can do it again and again. So you can actually double proc. No other class is in a position, as far as I'm aware, where they can really do this, or not as reliably as the rotations can call for. So this is a beautiful mix of so many things coming together to allow this to be a thing. And you might be wondering, well, why do you even want to do Hydromancy? Why not do like a Doom Sigil or something, which would be another thing to go for? But the thing is, we're on Rev, right? And there's this trait that I talked about, Abyssal Chill. When you chill a foe, inflict torment. So that procs with our Hydromancy sigil, and the torment now is just as strong as bleeds. So essentially we get to put out a ton of torment from the Hydromancy sigil, plus the chill as well, just by doing this as we fight. We press F1 and weapon swap together, and it's a really fun style of playing the game. It's very, very interesting to me. That could potentially still exist when shortbow comes, but we won't be swapping from mace axe to another mace axe that just has a different sigil on there. We'll be doing a different thing. So interesting stuff. I found that the way that the build has blended with the theme and just generally everything has been really cool. I like that I actually do get to raid on this every week. This is the strongest warg killer I've ever seen in Escort. Not that I played many, but because it bursts so much torment and so much chill so hard and so fast, fighting against, doing the warg roll is incredibly easy. You guys will see. People classically run necros for this, but trust me, Condi Rev is the way to go. And yeah, this is one of the builds that I've been playing. All the information is here on stream. It's 4 Nightmare, 2 Trapper I'm running at the moment. I actually hope the Path of Fire adds a full rune set that would be worthwhile for this. And I'm on Pure Vipers with everything I'm running with this trait selection: Corruption, Devastation, Invocation. As you can see here, Mace Axe, Mace Axe. And so with Smoldering I'm running, but there's other variants you can do, Bursting and stuff. And there you go. So, let's have a look at another one of the builds that I've recently been playing that I'm very excited about. Let's talk a little bit about Elementalists. So this one is also very fun. If you guys have ever wanted to play an incredibly raw, very real, classic feeling healing support mage, right? Like a proper water magic white mage style class ever in Guild Wars 2. The most recent balance patch added the like purest iteration of that I've ever experienced. And so I've played a lot of Support Tempest. I've talked a lot about Support Elementalist and Support Tempest in my time on Guild Wars 2. It really got improved on the most recent patch and in an incredible way. So let's talk about it. Now, first of all, as a Tempest, one of the main ways you can support people at the moment is through Auramancing. This is probably, in my opinion, the hardest fractal carry for pugs. It's the best build you can ever run in fractals to carry pugs. It's insane protection. It's insane frost aura duration. I've done multiple videos on it in the past. But really, it all revolves around, well, it doesn't entirely revolve around, but it involves this water trait here, Powerful Aura, okay, where you share your auras out. That's one form of support Ellie. There's actually another form of support Ellie you can sometimes tech on, and people have been doing for a while, and that is instead to take off Powerful Aura, instead run this, Soothing Mists, and instead of running Dagger Warhorn, to instead run a Staff. And with this build, and some other minor changes, of course, you can go Magi's Rune, Magi's Gear, and Monk Runes specifically. This is like an incredibly raw, potent, just straight up healer that puts out massive heals passively and around them through the water auto attacks, through regeneration, through Soothing Mist, which you get as a minor trait from water magic while you're in combat. A minor trait that gets buffed crazily using Soothing Power. So what this build is, this build's very, very, very strong in scenarios where you've already got a lot of boons going around, or you just need lots of pressure cooker healing. And it's had its place in Guild Wars 2, especially on the raiding scene. While Auramancing has been very strong for fractals and 5-man content, this build is incredibly potent for certain raid encounters where people aren't that good and they just sort of need a good carry. Like Matthias, this build is amazing at. Cairn at the start of Wing 4, this build is amazing at. I'd even argue it's pretty good for certain other encounters like Sloth. It's a very, very, very powerful raw healer. It's not like a druid in that it's a damage buffer as well, but it's one of those things, like quite often if our raid is a bit shaky, we'll just tech this on instead of one DPS, and it kind of lets most teams get carried through most content. Very, very strong. Anyway, so this is nothing new, but the devs made the build come into its own a bit more with the most recent patch with some interesting Arcane changes, and my god are they fun. So in Arcane now, you guys might remember core Ellies from a long time ago might remember that Arcane used to be associated with Staff. There was a trait in there, Blasting Staff, but eventually that got rolled into baseline and we didn't have it anymore. Well, they finally added a Staff interaction back, as well as a couple of other things. They've basically made Arcane viable as a support mode thing. So now if you turn Earth off, basically take the same build we've been experiencing before, but you take Earth off, you have a viable slot here now for a support build in Arcane Abatement. This is the full damage trait. I showed it off on Rev a second ago. The additional benefit to this now is you can heal people around you whenever you swap attunement. This might have some cool synergies with Weaver. You've also got your Grandmaster, which of course you can take Evasive Arcana, and you can dodge roll for blasting and water fields or just dropping cleansing waves and stuff. That's not particularly new either. But the middle tier, this is what's really fun, Arcane Resurrection. So this trait's existed for a long time. What it means is when you press F on someone, you can revive them quicker, and they also get an aura when they stand up, and you get that aura too. I used to run this a lot on PvP. I used to play like an ambulance build that would insta-res lots of people with the old mercy runes and stuff. They added an extra thing on this, okay? And that is that now, when you take this trait, it modifies one of your staff abilities, your water staff ability 3. So this right here, Geyser. Now, if you guys don't know what Geyser is, already is an incredibly powerful burst heal on 5 targets. It doesn't last long, as you can see, it's about to turn off already there, it's gone. But while you're in it, it's such a powerful heal, incredibly strong. What this trait does is it gives us an added effect. It means that every tick of its duration, it will also revive allies that are on the ground. So any transfusion necros will be familiar with, but this is on 5 targets, guys. So it's massive chunk healing now on 5 targets, and unlike any other instance really of this where it's from a trait or something, I suppose there are skills that you can proc to revive people from range, but this is actually at 1200 range, so I can revive someone from all this distance very quickly. Not only that, but 5 people from this distance all the way over there. Not only that, but also if you have a look at the trait, already we were getting a bonus effect from a resurrection. We were pushing the aura on people. Now we're getting another one. When we press F on the body, it summons a geyser automatically. And that is incredibly strong. So we walk over to someone, if we're in a raid, for example, like Matthias, and a ton of people have just been Hadoukened or something, when we press F, it means around us, all the targets that died at the same time around us get revived at the same time because it automatically drops a geyser. Even better, that geyser can stack on top of one you cast with your own staff. So I can cast a geyser and then press F and I have 2. So people are reviving even quicker. And then the craziest thing about this already was incredibly exciting to me, and I was having a lot of fun playing with it. But one thing became apparent with why this is so absurdly strong, being able to range res people from 1200 range and so forth. But is, remember, Geyser isn't just a resurrect, it's actually a flat heal, and an incredibly strong, potent flat heal. So if you're in a situation where someone has died, say at Slothazor out in the poison, or at Matthias they never cleansed the corruption, they've got like a big, horrible, damaging nuke field around on them that's pressuring them to death from downstate. What is truly amazing about this build now is you can charge over to someone, drop a geyser on their body to start reviving them, and they're going to be getting pressured as a body. But when you press F as well, you're not just double reviving them with your hands and with the double geyser, but you're healing yourself an incredible amount too. So you can face tank ridiculously damaging AoEs at basically no cost to yourself, and 5 allies around you can face tank ridiculously dangerous AoEs while they pick up their friends. It is really, really fun. It is a beautiful extra thing that helps to differentiate the 2 forms of support Ellie that exist now. And like I said, if you like the idea of playing a very backliney, Healy kind of build, the amount of downstate and res potential this thing has is obscene now, and I definitely recommend you guys checking it out. I've been playing a lot of this, and it's one of the most exciting things that came of this patch. And don't just take my word for it. I'm sure someone in the comments will verify what I'm talking about here, that it is absolutely that fun, and probably far too strong for what it is. But hey, no nerfs in sight, baby. So those are the first 2 builds. Those are the first 2 big things that I've been playing and I really enjoyed about the last patch. Moving on to the final one. The final one I probably have the most to say about, and I'm most enthusiastic in terms of it being like a new playstyle, and I think we can get the most information out of. It's actually a Mesmer build. Mesmer is a class in Guild Wars 2 that gets summoned, essentially. You get to spawn things that fight alongside you. And aside from condition damage Mesmer, which can summon a lot of Pistoliers, very rarely in Guild Wars 2 has there ever been a thing, especially on a power variant, that we've had a build where the Mesmer can summon lots of phantasms that do lots of damage and really kind of play that phantasm playstyle. Mostly it's been much more about shattering them, and it's been about replacing them, and it's about quality and utility, especially during the Heart of Thorns days as we've gone into Chronomancer. Well, there has been since this patch. It's incredibly fun. This is not a Chronomancer build, this is a Mesmer build. There is a very viable power phantasm Mesmer, and I would actually say, guys, this is the best build in Guild Wars 2 for any new player. This is not only the best build in Guild Wars 2 for any new player, it's also the most pure, just like the Ellie build I showed off a second ago, gives you this very pure representation of a backline support. This is the most pure, like, raw summoning build Guild Wars 2's ever had, in my opinion, like, for flat damage. This is, like, what you would hope to feel like as a Minion Mancer, for example, but it's attached to the Mesmer class. It's very, very fun. It is also probably, in my opinion, the best representation and example and implementation of a ramp-based power build that I've ever seen in Guild Wars 2. So we classically think of like power builds as spiking with damage very hard. Condi builds, on the other hand, can hit more, but they take longer to ramp into it. In recent years, a lot of Condi builds haven't really had much ramp anyway. There's not necessarily has to be ramp on Condi builds. They can slam them all out very fast. But we've never really properly seen a really good ramp-based power build. So this is a build that now exists, which is all about putting illusions out and ramping them up, and they end up doing ridiculous damage. It is now possible to be a top DPS, realistic scenarios, and you know, when we're not talking about the top 10%, top 5%, be top DPS on a Mesmer, power Mesmer I've snagged multiple times, or be top 2nd or 3rd damage, to hit harder than most other people in your entire group on a damage, but pure damage based Mesmer. So if you guys haven't liked the sound of Chrono or Mirage because it's Condi, power Mesmer does totally exist right now, especially in the raiding scene, and especially the weaker the group is. So let's talk about this a bit. It revolves mostly around phantasms, and specifically the phantasmal swordmen. So what we do is we summon lots of phantasmal swordsmen that attack. So first let's look at domination. Now, as a GW1 player, I was a big fan of Domination. Domination doesn't have too much to do in this build and can kind of be swapped off, but there's an important trait here. Domination gives you empowered illusions. That illusions deal more damage. You can also give yourself Distortion on Signets, and this build runs Signets, so I'd recommend it. You can also take either Power Block or Mental Anguish, if you like. I prefer Power Block. It's not... Most people forget that Power Block disables the cooldowns of your enemies, so if you interrupt certain things in PvE, it does stop trash from hurting, and it lets you pulse damage out on trash as well. Really nice in fights like Zera and Sabbather. Much more rarely is Mental Anguish good. I don't know why people recommend this so much. But anyway, so Domination, where it gets really interesting though is dueling, okay? So on dueling, we can give our Phantasms Perma Fury, and the goal is that we want our Phantasms to have 100% crit chance, so you mix Assassins in on this build. It's like a Berserker Assassins mix of Scholar Runes. Here we take Fencer's Finesse, we know about this. Whenever we strike with a sword, or our Phantasms strike with a sword, we gain extra ferocity, also lowers our cooldowns, and don't forget it's sword 5 that we care a lot about in terms of getting our damage up. We get superiority complex, which I think is new with this patch, and that's that our crits now just straight up do more damage, and crit damage against CC'd foes, or foes that are quite low. Also, it goes even higher. So this is a new trait. This helped power Mesmer specifically push itself up there in the rungs. So superiority complex helps. And then finally, we got illusions. So illusions is like the Mesmer's 5th line. It's all about this. And of course, we're using illusions to do our damage on this build. So illusions is a no-brainer. We're going to take compounding power, which gives us increased damage for each of our illusions. And we're always going to have 3 rolling. We're just basically going to have 3 Phantasms constantly attacking. So... and doing our bidding for us. So this just gives us extra damage there. We get Phantasms attack more often, which is super important. The reason we like Swordsmen is because they have a low cooldown on their attack, and taking that lowers it even more. And obviously it hits really hard and so forth. And finally, the new Grandmaster that really is the icing on the cake, Phantasmal Force. So check this out, guys. Phantasms permanently increases damage whenever they attack or whenever they gain might. So they will get tons of might because of PS and stuff in raid fights. Now, technically, the might that your team splashes out will go to your allies first. So if you're stacked well, then your Phantasms won't get might as frequently as you'd expect. But whenever they attack, they gain stacks, and it goes all the way up to 25. So just with this patch, our Phantasms get 25% more damage on our Swordsmen. But it's based behind a ramp wall. And don't forget, okay, summoning Phantasms in the first place has ramp to it, right? Like, if I cast Phantasmal Swordman, it goes on cooldown and I only have 1. And I have to wait for that cooldown to come back up, and then I can summon a second, and then I have to wait, and then I can summon a third. So there's inherent ramp immediately to just get our 3 illusions, and we can bypass that with, say, Signet of the Ether by Phantasmal 5, by using the 5 and then the Signet and then going back. But there's an inherent ramp, and then the devs played into it even further by adding this trait, which plays into the ramp even more. So it takes a while to get our 3 up, and then it takes a while beyond that for all 3 of them to get their 25 stacks. And then finally, at that point, you're going to start doing tons of damage and very consistent and comfortable damage. So that's the build. That's the way it works. I think it's a really fun idea of how they designed Phantasmal Force, and I love the place that this build's gone into now. So I mentioned earlier that this is the best noob build I've ever seen. So the reason for that is that once you've got your Phantasms up, generally speaking, your only job then, in a damage roll, is to just use your auto attacks and Blurred Frenzy here to do damage. And people who haven't been following Mesmer Balance for a long time might not realize Blurred Frenzy hits a ton of damage now. It was buffed quite a while ago now. But so that's mainly your main job, but most of your damage is coming from the Phantasms. And so what this means is all you're doing is using 1-1-1-1-2, and that doesn't take much brain power at all. And that lets you focus on the mechanics that are at play elsewhere in the raid. It lets you learn about Sapper Bombs at Sabbather. It lets you learn about not dropping poison on the group at Sloth. It lets you learn about all the different stuff, which really are the beauty of raids, and that there's so much other stuff going on. So this is great for catching up. This is amazing for looking like a really competent, decent player while you're still uneasy about how the fights themselves actually work. Every raid fight in Guild Wars 2, every Fractal really as well, the more recent ones, they're a battle between knowing your build, but also knowing the fight. And what this does is it makes that build aspect for new players much more a thing of the past. So you might say, okay, WP, I understand that, but why do you think this is so much better? This is not the first simple build to exist in Guild Wars 2. And that's very true. Power Engineer, I've played a lot of and talked a lot about. It's much more spammy than people give it credit for, but that's a very simple build. Hammer Guardian is the most simple build, really, that's ever happened. And that's just auto-attacking. You can literally play a Hammer Guardian with no hands on the keyboard at certain periods in the game. game's balance, right? Just letting the auto attack roll. So, you know, when this is competing with Hammer Guardian, how can I say this is the best new build that's ever existed in Guild Wars 2? The reason I say that it's the best that's ever existed in Guild Wars 2 is this. Beyond just not having to use anything more really than your skill 1 and 2, you also have the luxury of messing up and still doing a lot of damage. So let's say, for example, you get caught out of position and now you're stuck and you can't go fight the boss. You're not near the boss. Your auto attacks won't work. If you're on a Hammer Guardian, you're now useless. You only have to auto attack, but you're stuck. You need to be in melee. You can't do anything. This build, even if you're a million miles away, you've got no idea what you're doing. You're running around like a headless chicken spamming about face. Your 3 swordsmen will continue attacking. And I'm not saying that new players will do that, but there are a lot of situations in raids where things take your focus away. Where, say, a friend of yours goes downstate and you need to press F to res them up. You go downstate. Like, if you're a new player and you go into the downstate, on this build it doesn't even matter because your swordsmen are not in the downstate and your swordsmen will continue attacking. It's because of those reasons that when I get top DPS on this, when I do more damage than anyone else, even though all I'm doing is pressing 1, 1, 1, 2 in terms of damage, it's on the messy fights. It's stuff like Slothazor and Matthias and Cairn, for example, to a lesser extent. It's on the fights where people can sort of collapse a bit more. This guy just continues pressuring with damage again and again and again and again, much like the Condi Phantasm builds have also in the past. So this really does hit very hard. There's a discussion then. A lot of people don't like the idea of this, and there is a discussion to be had. Should builds like this exist in Guild Wars 2? Should something so easy to play always do so good damage? Because people like the idea of risk-reward, right? Like, the riskier playstyles, the harder it is, the better it should be. As a purist, as a gamer, like from a very pure position, I sort of agree with that. But I also think in MMOs, other things come into play, like accessibility and affording opportunities for new players to feel comfortable getting into raiding and keeping game populations and stuff up. And I actually think that builds like this are okay for the game. I'm happy when builds like this have a place. I think, inherently speaking, the flavor of a Phantasm or a Minion Mancery build or whatever, that kind of flavor style build is always going to be very passive and very easy. And so once you accept that fact, it's kind of a question of, okay, do you just never let them happen? And that's what we've seen with Necro. They've never let minions be that good. We've never had a minion-based raiding build or dungeon build or fractal because they're very passive, right? And I think that might be what the devs have been playing with. But I like it, the idea that they might actually embrace that and say, okay, no, look, we'll have these deliberately simple builds that have an avenue. My only thing to this, okay, I agree that it feels a bit cheesy and weird. My only caveat then is a build that is incredibly easy to play and also a build that does tons of damage. If it has those two qualities, that build should be allowed to exist only if it doesn't also offer a lot of team utility. And so that would be the criteria, I would say, if it's OP or not. And so let's look back at this Mesmer build. I actually think that it probably is OP, but not because of its damage and not because of its running phantasms, but because it can give too much utility. For example, the variant I run, most of your utilities are free to do whatever the hell you want. So you can put Time Warp on and give a lot of quickness out for people. You can run Signet of Humility to pop break bars, which is what I find myself quite often doing. You can very comfortably give yourself Distortion as well with access to all these Signets because you're in Domination. You can give even more break bar damage on the Signet of Domination. And then even crazier as well, one thing that I loved playing on this build, but it's definitely OP, is with the way that they changed mantras in this patch as well, so you can keep spamming Power Spike. This is also a part of the game that you can play. You can keep doing this. But one of the things I love doing as well on this build is you can, in the middle of fight, summon Power Break, pop it, and use a Signet of Inspiration in the middle of the fight while you're doing all this damage. And you can put out incredibly reliable, very frequent Aegis and stability on your team. Which is really the realm of what Guardian should be doing, and I think is too strong for the support that it offers. Not to mention the fact that once you get your 5 swordsmen up, you can swap to Focus, and you can use Temporal Curtains, which is incredibly strong for balling enemies up, for manipulating things. Again, even more break bar damage, so I think that this, generally speaking, does have a bit more too much utility. It's not an inspiration build, so it can't share Distortion. Thank God, because then it would be way out there. But I think that if there's anywhere that this is overpowered, is because it has too much of that. Another really fun thing, by the way, and hopefully you've been seeing some footage of this as the video's been going along, that I had a lot of fun on, really interesting, was this opens up opportunities for flaking. So I think there's probably a way you can run a flak build at Demos on this. So if people don't know, on some raid bosses, they'll have an attack that they always use on the furthest away target. And when they attack that target, they paint the ground with deadly AoEs that don't go away for a very long time. And so the point is you need one player to stay at range. You need a ranged player to keep those AoEs away from the group so that everyone else can stack in melee. There are two very prominent flacking encounters right now. That would be the final boss, Demos, and the final boss of the first wing as well, which is Sabbather. At Demos, there's a lot of pressure, but the idea is that you can run this build, summon 3 swordsmen, okay, and then just walk away. You could be like 1,500 range away. Well, you can't be that far away. You could be like 1,200 range away, flacking, and your guys are doing tons of damage. And so what you can see on screen right now is this is me doing this at Sabbather on a pure glass build, not even dipping in and out very well. And I got like 12,000 damage a second while baiting Sabbather stuff. It allowed my team to run double Condi Druid in the middle. Really fun. I love opportunities like this where new classes and builds can slot into established roles. And so, yeah, that's Power Phantasm Mesmer, which I've also been playing a lot of since the patch. If I wanted to see any changes to this, it would be more reliance on certain utilities to get our damage going, and they don't offer other things, right? So that our quality of life that we offer our team is a little bit lower. But I'd also like to see another change, and that is a change where our phantasms don't despawn so quickly when we walk out of range of them. So there is a mechanic with Mesmer where if you walk too far away from your target, your summons go away. And looking at Sabbather, right, this build could be really fun to be a cannon runner at Sabbather. Imagine this, guys. You summon your phantasms on Sabbather, they're rolling the damage, and then your build specifically is teched so that you then go do the cannons. And that's okay, because you keep doing damage to Sabbather while you go off to do the cannons. How awesome would that be? There's other situations in raiding as well where similar things can come up. But quite often, like Demos is another one, when you go to the other realm, it would be nice if your phantasms didn't despawn. But unfortunately, they do quite quickly, and I think that that's a little bit of a shame, which forces you to re-ramp, and then that really hinders the build. So yeah, the last bit of discussion I would also have about this build, in terms of whether it's OP, is it's very much a raiding thing. A lot of other builds like Hammer Guardian and like Power NG and a lot of the more simple variants, there have been Thief rotations and playstyles that have been incredibly simple as well. A lot of these things are very strong, but they're also very strong in other formats and like open world and personal story and stuff like that. The weird thing about the Power Phantasm Mesmer is, even though it's very strong in this specific role and it's a great noob build, it's actually kind of rubbish in other areas of the game. It's not very fun in open world because you don't get time to ramp with your power. You don't get time to summon all 3 things and then the target dies and it goes on. With Mirage, we'll be able to snap the phantasms to new targets and stuff. But generally, this isn't that fun for fractals. This isn't that fun or effective for fractals or open world or PvP or world versus world. It's got certain efficacy, but certainly not as much as many of the other simple builds have. And for that reason, I think that, you know, if it's something that's so significantly, specifically tailored for raiding scenarios, is it okay for it to exist? And my answer right now, I think, quality of life nerfs pending, it should. And it's been really fun. It's been really cool to see like this whole new dimension open up for Buildcraft in my mind. And aspects of this we've seen before. But yeah. So there you go, guys. Those are the 3 builds that I've been playing in the past 2 months, just before Path of Fire comes out. I've been doing a lot of other stuff, to be honest. Guardian I've been playing a load. If people don't know, Guardian's very strong at the moment. Incredibly high, solid burst damage. And, you know, there were even all those changes to Power NG as well in that patch, which were very much listening to the community. That was all brilliant. So, generally, I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the balance. I think balance has slowly but surely got better and better and better. And these are the 3 ones I wanted to show off. There you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know what you think about any of this. If you even like a video like this, I'd also love to hear. And until next time, I will see you very shortly for some POF builds. Should be good.